Hi everyone. So today we're starting a new unit, which is going to be about the Islamic world and the places it impacted, such as the Middle East and India, Southeast Asia, and Africa. So today we're just going to do a short intro into Islam. So first I like to talk about how Islam is related to some of the other religions that we've already studied. So we have looked at the rest of the major world religions. Islam is the newest of the world religions, which is why now we're kind of in this new time period. But it's in some ways viewed as a continuation of some other religions. So these important people who are important in Judaism and in Christianity, Muslims also believe in those people. They believe that these were important prophets who came before the Prophet Muhammad. So Muslims believe in many of the same religious figures as Jews and Christians. An example of how they differ, unlike Christians, they do not believe that Jesus was the Son of God or the Messiah, but they do believe that he was an important prophet. And so they believe that Muhammad, who lived in the 600 CE, was the final prophet. Another way to think about it is they believe like all these other people had important information from God, but Muhammad had like the final or most complete information. So just a little bit of background. Muhammad was born into the tribe called the Quraysh on the Arabian Peninsula, today Saudi Arabia, and he was raised by relatives who were very active in the caravan trade, so they were traders. Muslims believe that Muhammad received his first revelation from the angel Gabriel around 610 CE. So Muhammad was kind of in the story like disillusioned with what was going on in society, and so he went in the mountains to meditate, and Muslims believe that God spoke to him through an angel. Muhammad came into conflict with the people in his region because after he received this revelation from God, Muhammad started preaching that there was only one God, and he preached monotheism. People in this region were polytheistic, and so they became very upset with this conflict. And so Muhammad was forced to flee from Mecca to Medina over this conflict and this persecution. Muslims mark this as the beginning of their calendar. Muhammad eventually returned to Mecca and destroyed the idols of the Kaaba. So I think you learned about the Kaaba in geography, but here it is in the picture. This is a place that Muslims believe Abraham built this temple to the one true God, like way, way back in history. And over time, it had become a place where people worshipped all different types of gods, and they had statues or idols of all these different gods. Once Muhammad started preaching that there was only one God, he came back and said, no, we need to get rid of all the statues and idols here. This is a place that's only supposed to be dedicated to one God. And Muhammad's revelations were written down into the Quran after his death. So the Quran, Muslims believe, is the message or the information that Muhammad received directly from God. Some of the basic beliefs of Islam are in the 5 pillars of Islam. So the first one is just profession of faith. So Muslims say that there's only one God and that his prophet is Muhammad. Muslims also pray 5 times a day, and they're supposed to face towards the Kaaba in Mecca because that's the holiest site in Islam. They're supposed to give charity or alms to those in need, so helping the poor. Fasting during the holy month of Ramadan, so during that month they're not supposed to eat or drink during the day. And then making a pilgrimage to Mecca called the Hajj once in their lifetime if they're able to and they're financially able to and they're well enough to undertake that journey. So why did Islam take hold so quickly, especially in the Middle East? Well, it's easy to learn and practice. So on the previous slide, I showed you the 5 pillars of faith. If you have faith and say this is what you believe, you can consider yourself part of this religion. There's no long, extensive conversion process. There's no hierarchy or priesthood, so there's not a lot of bureaucracy. It teaches equality, so what that means is that it says that everyone can have equal access to salvation. Non-Muslims who were people of the book a term for that is dhimmi. People of the book refer to Jews and Christians. They're called that because, remember, they have that common heritage. Like, they all believe that they're descended from Abraham. So in this early period, the Muslims said to Jews and Christians, like, we're going to grant you religious toleration because you have kind of a similar belief system to us, even though, of course, it's different. But we have these similar origins. We're all monotheists. And they allowed them to have religious freedom. They just had to pay an extra tax. It's also a religion that spread really well through trade, and the Middle East is a natural trading point where a lot of caravans and different people are moving through. And then the early Muslims waged war to conquer new territory, and so that helped it spread as well, against who they called pagans or non-believers. It's important to note that the early conquests were motivated by political and economic gains. They did not forcibly convert people. Again, they actually practiced religious toleration towards Jews and Christians in these early times. And so the conquest was motivated by wanting to control more territory. So this map shows you how quickly the Muslim armies were able to conquer this huge empire. So the red area is what they conquered just under the time of Muhammad before he died. And then the orange area was within like about 50 years of Muhammad's life. And then the yellow was by 750. So just take a minute and look at that. It's the Middle East, all across North Africa, up into Spain and Portugal, and all the way east to the Indus River in India. So they created this huge empire within about 100 years. One term you'll see a lot is Dar al-Islam. So I want you to know what that means when you see it, because it looks like this, strange term, but it just means the Muslim world. So it just means like the area where most people are Muslim. Sharia is the law that Muslims used to govern their daily life. And so things that were included in Sharia law in these empires, laws governing morality, honesty, no gambling, no enslavement of Muslims or dhimmi people. So it was supposed to just be a law code of like how you should live your life. Now, let's talk about women in Islam under the time of Muhammad. And there's a lot said in the media and everything today about this issue, but I'm going to tell you what it was like in the time of Muhammad and shortly after, in this early time. So Islam said that men could have more than one wife if they were able to provide for their wives and their children and treat all their wives well. Islam specifically made laws against female infanticide. So in some other cultures where sons were valued more than daughters, sometimes people would not take care of their female children. And Muhammad said, no, you have to take care of all your children. Muhammad's wife, Khadijah, was educated and a businesswoman herself. In this time period, women were allowed to inherit property and ask for a divorce. And there's also a lot of talk today about like religious head coverings and modest clothing. It's important to note that these were already traditions that were common in this region. So you probably learned in geography, like in a very hot desert climate, sometimes we would think that people would wear less clothing, but actually it makes more sense a lot of times to cover yourself more to protect yourself from the sun and the sand and all of that kind of thing. And then covering your head is something that was common in a lot of religions, especially during times of worship, as a sign of respect. Over time, women's position lowered in some of these societies, but again, this is what it was supposed to be like in the time period when Islam formed. Okay, so you probably know that Islam split into two different sects, the Sunnis and the Shia or Shiites. So the Sunnis are the people who accepted the first early rulers. So after Muhammad died, he didn't leave any rules on how they should choose a successor, and this created a lot of issues because he didn't say it's supposed to be like a relative of mine, it's supposed to be this person or that person, and so they were kind of left to figure out what they should do. And so the rulers that came after Muhammad are called caliphs. Some people thought that the caliph should be a direct relative of Muhammad. some people thought it didn't matter, we just need to choose a good ruler. And so Sunnis are people that said we just need to choose a good ruler. They don't have to be related to Muhammad, and they thought all the first early caliphs were just fine. The Shia supported Ali, who was the son-in-law of Muhammad, and they felt like the caliph should be directly related to Muhammad. And Ali was actually kind of passed over for that position, and they didn't like that. And so the two sects struggled over succession. It produced a lot of civil war, assassinations of rulers, all these problems. And they're still divided today. Today, Sunni has by far more followers. They're about 85%. But there are still parts of the world like Iran that are majority Shiite. And so again, the early Islamic world was governed by empires called caliphates. The caliph was the political and religious leader. This is kind of strange for us to think about today because we have separation of church and state, but the caliph was the leader of Islam and the leader of the empire. Okay, so this course, WAP, is supposed to start around 1200. And we go back and learn about the early civilizations because those are important, and also the state of Texas says you need to know about all these other civilizations like the Roman Empire because they really laid the foundation for our civilization. So we're going to start, there was another Muslim empire before this, but we're going to start with the Abbasid Caliphate. So here on the map is where the Abbasids ruled. They took over in 750 CE. You can see they controlled the Middle East and part of North Africa. Baghdad, which is in Mesopotamia today in the country of Iraq, was their capital city. And that became a really important city for learning and scholarship and trade and the arts and just lots of different things that you're going to learn about this week. Another thing that spread with the conquest of the Arabs was the Arabic language. So let me distinguish, first of all, between Arab and Muslim. So Arab is a term that refers to an ethnic group. So a lot of Arabs come from the Middle East, but you can be an Arab that comes from another region like North Africa. And then Muslim refers to the religion. So you can be, a lot of Arabs are Muslim, but a lot of them are other religions as well. There's also people who are Muslim who are not Arab. So I just want to distinguish between those two terms. The Arabic language spread with the conquest of North Africa. So after, in the time of Muhammad and then right after, when they conquered up that huge territory, they also spread their language. And so that's why today, for example, in these countries that you see on the map, they mostly speak Arabic. It goes back to this time of Muhammad and because of their conquests. So I showed you on the map, the original map of the conquest of Islam, that they moved all the way into Spain. So an independent caliphate in Spain developed called Al-Andalus. So they were over time separate from the rest of the Islamic Empire, but they're very, very important to us because they had a lot of cultural achievements. So Islamic achievements that you're going to learn about this week in things like math and science, literature, medicine, also occurred in Spain. And the reason they're so significant is that those things then were able to spread through cultural diffusion to the rest of Europe. Greek math, science, and philosophy was also recovered by the Muslim world and spread back to Europe through Muslim Spain. So after the fall of the Roman Empire in Europe, Europe was somewhat in chaos during this period, whereas the Muslims had this united empire and they were having a lot of achievements. So they were able to capture the works and preserve the works of people like the ancient Greek philosophers and the ancient Roman philosophers, and then spread those back to Europe so people could learn about them. The capital of the Islamic Caliphate in Spain, Cordoba, had the largest library in the post-classical world, just to give you an idea of how much this was a center of learning. As the Abbasid Caliphate fragmented, new Islamic political groups emerged, most of which were dominated by the Turkic people. So all that's saying is as the Abbasid Caliphate started to kind of decline, some other Turkish people took advantage of that. So the Seljuk Turks came into the Middle East and started taking over territory. The Delhi Sultanate, which was a Muslim empire we're going to learn about, came into India and started taking over. And so the Turks, which were originally a nomadic group, started to invade Muslim areas and establish new empires. So the Turks were a group of nomadic people originally from Central Asia. I kind of circled the area on the map where they're from. They spoke the Turkic language, and many converted to Islam. They had a tradition of being what's called a ghazi, or like a raider, that made them really good at conquest. So originally they were nomadic, and so they were used to moving around a lot, riding horses and waging war against their enemies. And so once they kind of took that energy and focused it on building an empire, they were really successful. So the map shows the places where Turkic languages dominate today, and then where they originally came from, I circled on the map. The Seljuk Turks were a Turkic-speaking people who invaded the same territory held by the Abbasids and the Byzantines. The Seljuks eventually took over the title of Sultan, replacing the Caliph as the political leader. So as the Abbasid Empire started to kind of fall apart a little bit and become weaker, the Seljuks saw this as an opportunity, and they invaded and started setting up their own empire there. Now overall, the Muslim empires became very wealthy through trade. In the Middle East, that's just always kind of a crossroads of trade. Camels, and caravans. So most overland trade traveled by camel caravan. Camels were especially suited to travel across deserts because they can go for a while without water, but also they have really, really wide feet, and so their feet don't sink into the sand like you and I would if we're walking on the sand. And so they were native to the Arabian desert, but then they moved throughout North Africa for trade. The Arabs also developed a camel saddle, which you see in the picture, which enabled them to be able to actually ride the camel and make their travel even easier. They also set up caravansaries, which are kind of like rest stops or motels where people can stop with their caravan and spend the night, get rest for their animals, get new supplies, all that kind of stuff. And a lot of the trade that they carried was luxury goods between Asia and Europe. All right, you can see, if you look at the red lines, you'll see Baghdad is over there and has a star. So that is the major city that was developed. It was actually the capital of the Abbasid Empire. And the map also shows you other important trade routes and trade cities from this time period. So what factors would aid Baghdad in becoming an important trading city? Well, you can see it just has a really good location. So we call this whole area of the world Afro-Eurasia, representing Africa, Europe, and Asia. And you can see Baghdad is really right in the middle of those three continents. So between Europe, Asia, and Africa, it has a very good location for trade. It's connected to the Silk Road, but it's also not that far from the Indian Ocean and from the Mediterranean. So it can really connect to all of those different trade routes, which made it a really thriving trading city. Now, camel caravans are how the Muslims conducted a lot of their overland trade. They also were very active in sea trade, or what we call maritime trade. Their maritime trade was possible because they borrowed a lot of technology from other places. They learned about the compass from the Chinese. They learned about the lateen sail, which is a triangular sail like you see in the picture, from Southeast Asia and India. They learned about the astrolabe from the Hellenistic or Greek inventors. The astrolabe is pictured there. The astrolabe helps you tell your latitude in the world using things in the sky. They also learned about dhows, which are ships that were able to maneuver really quickly but also carry a lot of products. And they also benefited from a lot of cultural diffusion. So the Arabs learned, for example, paper making. Paper was invented in the Han Dynasty from the Chinese, and then they were able to use that for literature and scholarship. They also operated and began using banking systems, and they also used a money economy. So before coined money, people used barter system. They just traded with each other. But using money makes it a lot more simple because you can set clear prices, and you can also trade. You don't have to have something to exchange. So like say I want to buy something from you, but I don't have anything that you want, I can just use money, and it makes it a lot easier. So this map shows you where Islam spread through trade. The green area is the extent of the Muslim world by 1500 CE. So you can see Islam spread through the Middle East, into Central Asia, South Asia, even over into Indonesia and Southeast Asia, all across North Africa, and a little bit in East Africa. So it had a huge impact. Islam spread through a few key ways. The first one is merchants, and we talked about that just a minute ago. So they were very well connected through trade, and so as the merchants moved around, they naturally shared their religion. Like when you meet new people, you talk about your culture and where you're from. And so Islam spread through trade as people learned more about this religion. Another term I want to teach you related to that is diasporic merchant communities. Diaspora or diasporic means scattering. And we talked about that last week with the scattering of the Jews from the Roman Empire. Here, we're going to say that the Muslims are going out from their original empire and scattering throughout the world as they go to trade. So what happened is, for example, and they're in green on this map, as Muslim merchants went from the Middle East to India and Southeast Asia and Africa, they moved there and set up their own little Muslim communities in those places. Once they did that, that helped Islam spread even more because they had their own Muslim communities in these places, and people came to trade with them and converted sometimes to Islam. The second way that Islam spread is through missionaries. Missionaries are people who it's their job to go out into the world and spread their religion. So that's what they have devoted their life to do, and Islam had many missionaries who went throughout the world trying to convert people. All right, the last one, which you're going to find out more about in your assigned reading, are the Sufis. Sufis are Islamic mystics, and mystics emphasize like more of the spiritual connection with God or with a religion than just like a bunch of rules. So some people view religion as a bunch of rules you have to follow. The Sufis said no, it's more about having a personal connection with God and developing a relationship and that sort of thing, rather than focusing on strict rules. And that, like I said, you're going to learn more about that in the reading when you do your reading. But you can hopefully see how that kind of thing would really appeal more to people than just following a bunch of rules. And so the Sufis also were really successful in getting people to convert to Islam. So I just want to remind you that the PowerPoints or the lectures in this class are supposed to just be an overview of the material. The real details and meat of the class comes from your assigned reading. And remember, you'll always have a quiz over your assigned reading, so it's really important that you complete that. The quiz on this will be next Wednesday, so make sure you're completing your assigned reading on the Islamic world.